Okay, I think everyone who's here in the room and all the people who are listening in online, I think now's the moment to start this evening's proceedings. I'm very happy this evening to introduce Henry Barlow, who has kindly agreed to speak to us today about, I suppose, both past, recent, and maybe even future events or activities of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. His talk forms part of our series of lectures given by, let's call them the representatives of sister societies, to mark the bicentenary of the society's, the Royal Asiatic Society's founding. So we're very pleased that you have been able to come and be part of this sort of selection, let's say, of contributions from people in different parts of the world. Just want to point out that there's a wonderful interview with Henry online, carried out by, I think, the Cambridge Institute for Manufacturing in 2021. In it, Henry explains both his family's long-standing connections with Southeast Asia and also his own career trajectory that took him from studying German, Russian, and Chinese at Cambridge via many other places along the way back to Malaysia itself, where he was obviously very well placed in terms of observing, let's put it that way, observing the increasing Malaysianization that occurred in the latter part of the last century. That interview also explains Henry's own deep interest in and commitment to the history and culture of the region, which led to him becoming a member of the council of the MBRAS. And as I understand it, Henry is currently its treasurer, a post that, if I am correct, you've held for several decades, but not several, okay. Well, a fairly long time then.
30 years.
But, well, yes, impressive. So I just want to say thank you very much on behalf of the society here, both, as I said, people in the room, but also people online that we can't see, but they can see and hear us, for visiting the society this evening. And I'll just hand over to you to speak to us about the MBRAS's past, its present, and also its future. Thank you very much.
President, Professor Ansari, distinguished fellows and guests of the RAS, some of whom are old friends who I haven't seen for many years, I feel extremely honored to address the Royal Asiatic Society on the history and activities of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. I'll tell you a story at the end about the name and why it is that rather curious name. The Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society was founded in 1877 under the name of the Straits Branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. And since 1878, MBRAS, with the exception of the years of the Second World War and immediately after, has continuously published a journal. Currently, the Journal of the Malaysian Branch of the Royal Asiatic Society, which appears twice a year. You can have a look afterwards at copies of the latest journal. The journal carries articles both specialized and of general interest to Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, and the adjacent countries in Southeast Asia. It provides a rich cornucopia of information on all aspects of these three territories, and it has the distinction of being the learned journal with the longest continuous history of publication in Singapore and Malaysia, except for World War II. A browse through the black numbers will prove an enjoyable experience. Additionally, the Society publishes a series of monographs on specialized subjects which are felt to be of interest to members, as well as a series of reprints of earlier articles which have appeared in the journal or elsewhere. We'll come on to them later. The Society holds 1 or 2 meetings each year in one or more of Kuala Lumpur, Penang, Singapore, Bandar Seri Begawan, for talks on subjects of interest to members. And as I understand is happening today, we do it both physically and online so that we can bring in other people. And our talks are available to listen to afterwards through the website of MBRAS. The society is run by a council under a president, currently Tunku Muhammad Fauzi bin Tunku Abdul Hamid, a distinguished businessman from Kelantan. His predecessor was the recently deceased Tun Hanif Omar, at the time of his appointment, the youngest ever IGP in Malaysia. And I suspect some of you may know of or perhaps even have met him. First, a little history. The society was first established in 1877 at a meeting held at the Raffles Library in Singapore on the 4th of November, 1870. Officially, the society was formed for the purpose of collecting and recording scientific information on the Malay Peninsula and Archipelago, end quote. Interestingly, the first rules declared that the objects of the society were to be the investigation of subjects connected with the Straits of Malacca and the neighboring countries, publication of papers in a journal, and the formation of a library of books bearing on the objects of the society. Thanks to our lack of permanent premises, we have no library, but we have, over almost 150 years, very fully complied with the first two objectives. The society was established as a branch of this society, the Royal Asiatic Society of London, but corporate arrangements not then being as strict as they are today, this merely involved an agreement by the RAS to make their facilities available to Straits branch members when they were home on leave. Despite the name, the society is a fully independent registered society. More on that later. The early members were to a very large extent members of the government. The initial list indicates that well over 95% were European, and it's perhaps worth noting that the vice president from Penang was D. Logan, related to J.R. Logan, who had in earlier years been responsible for the establishment of the unfortunately short-lived Journal of the Indian Archipelago. This had flourished in the 1840s and 50s, as you probably know. The Society's inaugural address was delivered on the 28th of February, 1878, and the first issue of the journal, dated July 1878, was published in September the same year. 600 copies were printed, of which 500 were bound. Not all that much different from the numbers of copies that we print now, except that online arrangements mean that more and more people are opting to have the journal online, so going down. As already noted, publication has been maintained since then, except for the Japanese occupation. The names have changed slightly, in 1922 to the Malayan branch, and then in 1964 to the Malaysian branch. The headquarters, which were in the Raffles Museum in Singapore, were changed to Kuala Lumpur at the end of the 1960s, when the late Tan Sri Shepherd almost single-handedly saved the society from oblivion by actually hiring a vehicle, which he drove, I think himself, down to Singapore, and bundled into the back of the van all the papers that he could find before the Singapore authorities actually closed the door on us. They went through a period of, I suppose, nationalism, and the society was regarded as a bit fogey. And so if it hadn't been for Mubin Shepherd's activities, the society would certainly not exist now. He subsequently became one of the society's most distinguished editors, serving in this post for well over 20 years. In recognition of his contribution, a Shepherd Memorial Prize was instituted for the best third-year historical thesis at any university in Malaya, Singapore, or Brunei. We now have about 400 members, mostly Singaporean, Malaysian, and Bruneian, but with a distinguished leavening of academic institutions and individuals worldwide outside these territories. Given the membership, it was almost inevitable that in the early years of the Society, the journal should focus on the writings of the scholar administrators of the region. Leading names which featured in these early years were W.E. Maxwell and Frank Swettenham, the people who made history at the time. Maxwell's contributions were the more erudite, dealing with linguistic, anthropological, and other scholarly themes, while Swettenham's accounts tended to be of current affairs on the West Coast states, including what appears to have been at least one briefing paper for an incoming governor. Maxwell started a tradition of state histories with his History of Pera from native sources, published in 1883 and 1884. Classic papers which have been published in the journal over the years and which are still of relevance are Sadker's edition of Hugh Lowe's Pera Journals, a crucial document showing how the residential system developed. We've also published W.A. Pickering's early accounts of Chinese secret societies. Pickering was, of course, appointed in 1877 by the British government to administer the Chinese protectorate in Singapore. We also published Mill's British Malaya, 1824 to 67, edited by the late Mary Turnbull. Closer to the turn of the century, the Society's journals contained contributions by such well-known names in Malay studies as Wilkinson, Skeet, and Blagden. H.N. Ridley was editor with only brief respite for 21 years from 1890 to 1911, and he, of course, was responsible for propagating rubber throughout the country. Other leading names were Harnich, Bowden-Kloss, and Shelford, all of them zoologists. In the early years, there was no journal dedicated to natural history in the region, and it was thus inevitable that a number of chiefly botanical accounts should have appeared both at that time and later, particularly after the First World War, when the journal developed a fairly strong botanical slant with numerous contributions by people such as Burkill, famous for his Dictionary of the Economic Products of the Malay Peninsula, Symington, Malayan Diplocarps, and Merrill. W.G. Maxwell, son of W.E., Warren Barnes, and M. Makepeace of the Singapore Free Press contributed scholarly articles in the early years of the century. The interwar years also saw a large number of scholarly publications by the learned Sir Richard Winstead, by then in retirement after a distinguished career in the field of education in the Malay Peninsula. He specialized in critical editions of Malay texts, culminating in his History of Classical Malay Literature, first published in MBRAS just before the war in 1940, reprinted in 1958, and more recently reproduced in our reprints section. Winstead also followed in Maxwell's steps by publishing in the journal a number of additional state histories, beginning with the History of Kedah in 1920, continuing with Johor, Pera, which was perhaps his best, and Selangor. Several now feature in our reprint series, as does his History of Malaya, which was also first printed in the journal. One of the first Malaysians to contribute to the journal was Zainal Abidin bin Ahmad, Zaba, the first of whose several articles appeared in 1922. He continued to write increasingly on subjects connected with Malay language and literature till 1947. However, the authorship of the articles submitted to the journal for publication remained predominantly expatriate until the late 60s or early 70s. There were years marked by contributions from Linehan, Bradell, Purcell, and Tweedy. Gibson Hill edited the journal with distinction in the early years of his tenure, but he got very, very behindhand towards the end. For some 11 years from 1950. The biography of Gibson Hill has recently been published by the Society and makes quite an interesting read for those who are concerned and interested with Singapore matters. We must mention here also the extraordinary contributions over some 60 years of the late John Gullick, who I believe is well known to many of you here. He not only wrote a large number of articles for the journal, but was also deeply involved in the editing and selection of materials for both the monograph and the reprint series. The first non-expatriate editor was Professor Wang Gungwu, who himself contributed an important paper on the Nanhai trade with Southeast Asia in 1959, recently reprinted. It was a decade when a large number of papers relating to Chinese influences in the area were published, another outstanding one being Wong Lin Ken's The Trade of Singapore, also reprinted more recently. In addition to providing a wide range of articles on all aspects of the region, the journal can be used as a way into other literature. Sherborne's bibliographies of Malaya were produced at the end of the 19th century, and Beda Lim produced a substantial background bibliography in 1962. All journals are greatly improved by indices, and the journal has been well served in this respect by a series of indices, Lim and Vijayasuriya, and then additions to that, bringing the Index Malaysiana up to 1983. And indefatigable John Gullick, it's subsequently been further updated, and we now have a full index from 1878 up to 2020, both subject and author index, and separate indices of book reviews and obituaries. And we also have a contents index covering the same period. Additionally, the Society has produced microfilms of all journals published by us from 1878 to 2000, together with the indices on 47 reels available for purchase in the Society's office. I suspect AI is going to destine those for oblivion, but at the time we chose the medium rather than CD-ROM because it's both simpler and was cheaper. Moreover, we know that microfilm lends itself readily to digitization, which we come on to in a moment, and has a life of at least 50 years. We don't know how long CD-ROMs will survive physically, nor how long it may be before this technology is superseded. Long out of print early numbers of the journals have been reprinted privately and are available at a price from Schmidt periodicals in Germany and the USA. I've warned you, it's quite a price too. The journal has been accepted for inclusion in Elsevier's Scopus Citation Index starting in 2015. This tracks citations of articles from JMBRAS and other publications, and is used both by the Times Higher Education Supplement and the Quacquarelli-Simmons in calculating world university rankings. The editor of the journal, Paul Kotoska, also known to some of you, is always very happy to receive papers for consideration for publication. We have a panel of associate and assistant editors. Papers submitted, which should primarily deal with Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei issues, are subject to a rigorous independent review process. Starting with the June 2010 issue of the journal, arrangements were made with Muse, based on Johns Hopkins University in Washington, USA, to provide current issues of the journal online for universities who wish to subscribe. Additionally, all back numbers of the journal are available through JSTOR. Royalty payments from these sources are now the major source of our Society's income. And frankly, if we hadn't gone on to Muse and JSTOR soon after 2010, the Society once again would not have survived. Monographs. Our first series of monographs consists of a number of publications on subjects of interest to the Society, some in Malay, which would be unlikely in view of their specialized content to find a commercial publisher. This includes Nanning and Malacca, and Parkinson's previously unpublished The Guthrie Flagship, A History of United Suabaton Rubber Company. The history of this publication may be of some interest. Parkinson, later of The Law and the Prophets, of course, was the slightly cantankerous professor of the history of Singapore in the 1950s. In the course of this, he was commissioned by Sir John Hay, then chairman of Guthrie's, to write this history. Parkinson peppered it with so many digs at Hay's Scottish planting colleagues that Hay lost his temper, rejected the text out of hand, and rather than asking for a rewrite of certain parts, basically tore it up and refused to pay Parkinson. One copy of the text survived in the possession of dear old John Gullick, at that time a director of Guthrie's. He laboriously deciphered the faded type, and with the Society's assistance, we managed to trace the literary executors of Parkinson to the USA, of all places, from whom permission was obtained to publish the book in a slightly edited form. As might be expected from Parkinson's pen, it's a lively account of the early years of the rubber and oil palm industry, which was thus saved from oblivion. Other monographs include 37, the Penang Po Leung Kok, Chinese Women, Prostitution and Welfare Organizations, by Neil Kaur and Dato Koo Siat Chu, Murder Most Foul by Radin Fernando, being a very lively reconstruction of murder cases from Dutch archives of court proceedings in Malacca. Letters of Sincerity, the Raffles collection of Malay letters, thanks to Annabel, and Mulaika Hijaz, Victorious Wives, the disguised heroine in the 19th century Malay Shair, and de Souza Pinto's Portuguese and the Straits of Malacca, 1575 to 1619. Of the monographs most likely to be of interest to teachers and students of history in Southeast Asia, British Policy and Malay Politics, Baba Dipanagara, a Javanese account of the Java War, 1825 to 1830, and studies of 19th and 20th century Kedah and Pera will probably prove of most value to students and teachers. And Liu and Xiao's Through Turbulent Terrain, the trade of the Straits port of Penang is also of considerable interest. One of our recent monographs, the most colorful, was published in January 2020, just before COVID hit us, and is an English translation from the French of Jacques de Morgan's diaries and other associated scholarly writings, based upon his pioneering travels in remote areas of Pera in the 1880s. It's actually a fascinating account, and is particularly good on his accounts of the Orang Asli communities and the traditions and the way in which they lived at that stage, of course, before they'd been in any way affected by the colonial European civilization. On the reprint series, these fall under two headings. The first is reprints of old classics, many of which previously appeared in the pages of the journal. This include currently the letters of Sir Stamford Raffles to Nathaniel Woolwich, 1819 to 24, Winstead's History of Malay Literature, and a handsome 3-volume box reprint of Sejarah Melayu, which includes John Leyden's Malay Annals, the first translation into English of Sejarah Melayu, the second volume being a Romanized transcription of the Raffles MS-18 text, and the third being C.C. Brown's translation of the Malay Annals from the same text. Our reprint of Aradia's description of Malacca has also proved to be very popular. The second category comprises reprints of sets of articles on a theme which have appeared in the journal and elsewhere over a span of many years. Examples include Southeast Asia-China interactions, selections from the Selangor Journal, Malay boat building, being chiefly Gibson Hill's authoritative articles published in the journal on this subject, and a reprint of Mubin Shepherd's classic Malay Arts and Crafts. with some very nice colour plates in it. The year 2010 saw a major change in the Society's activities and finances. Our members had been steadily falling as older members who passed on were not replaced by a younger generation, less in favour of a society with a membership structure and hard copy publications. This was beginning to take a serious toll on our finances, which since the earliest years of the Society had to a large extent depended on membership dues, including a subscription to JMBRAS. Our consistent record of journal publication since our establishment in 1878 facilitated our acceptance into Project Muse, which, as I think you know, is a digital platform for scholarly journals, part of Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, and income from article downloads through the Muse website, which has more than offset the decline in subscription income. However, we hadn't realized when we first joined Muse that we were actually onto a treadmill. Maybe you found this as well. Although Muse are selective in the journals they accept online, the numbers accepted are expanding, and although the royalty pot increases, our share of it depends on the number of our downloads as a proportion of the total. So we find ourselves hoping for headline-hitting articles that are widely read. The alternative, of course, would be to increase the size and frequency of our journal, currently 2 issues a year, create a larger pool of potential download. The scope of the journal has also broadened. We encourage submission on society, culture, and arts, but the journal's reputation for publishing history lingers on. The December 2023 issue of the journal was 325th, and all back numbers under the journal's various names are available via JSTOR, providing a welcome supplement to our Muse income. Additionally, we're now putting some of our monographs and reprints online at a fee through Muse. For publicity purposes, we made a digital version of Skeet's classic and oft reprinted Malay Magic, available for free of charge as an open access title. And we're considering extending this policy to other titles. Bit of a hot potato, I think, like some for societies such as ours. There can be no doubt that our activities have greatly increased and improved the Society's profile as well as its finances through our online activities. The JMBRAS editorial team includes junior scholars, and the Society is currently developing a completely new website. We're discovering ways to ensure that if the Society will survive for another 150 years, but it's quite hard work, as I'm sure you realize. We've survived in different forms almost 150 years, almost exclusively, indeed I think I could say exclusively, through the dedicated efforts of a small number of volunteer editors, currently Paul Krotowsko, who will be well known to many of you, who does a superb job. It has contributed immeasurably to our knowledge of the peninsula and surrounding areas, and will no doubt continue to provide an enormously valuable resource for the teachers of history in the region and scholars for many years to come. I believe we're well placed to face the challenges of the AI era. Samples of recent publications are available here, and I would like, on behalf of our President and Council, to ask you to accept these as a gift, your own library. And I suspect you already have our journal, but I've no doubt that you will be able to find a suitable home for any duplicate copies which you may have. I promised to say something towards the end about the naming problems. It's a curious conundrum. The Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society is a misnomer in all but the last word. It's a society. It's not Malaysian, it's Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. It's not a branch. We're registered by dear old Mubin Shepherd with this name when he brought the society to Kuala Lumpur in the late 1960s. It's not royal, except insofar as the Sultan of Selangor is one of our patrons. Asiatic in certain circles is regarded as a term of abuse. So what do we do about it? We went to our council members, including our Brunei and Singapore representatives, and with the best will in the world, we could not find a name which everybody could agree on. This was 15 or 20 years ago. We're still struggling. If anybody's got any ideas, let me know. Thank you very much indeed. Happy to discuss on that.
Yes, I was going to just say thank you on behalf of all of us for taking us through that sort of span of what the MBRAS has been doing over the last 150 years. Obviously, you've been doing a really valuable job in from just what you shared with us about the various publications, whether it's the journal, whether it's the monographs or I mean, it'd be very interesting to be able to somehow get some sort of concrete evaluation of just how much useful work has been done by, colleagues and former colleagues and people associated with that society over the decades, if not hundreds of years now. So yes, I mean, people may have comments in the room, questions, which if you're happy to take those, that would be great. Otherwise, we can, discuss some of the challenges that you've identified. You talked about AI. I think, for us, put it slightly differently, I think as Gordon periodically reminds us, it's the open access challenge, which is particularly pressing for, I suppose, journals, but also increasingly the monograph style publications as well. In somewhere like Britain, the next REF or REF, is going to require a lot more to be open access published, to be eligible. So all these sorts of things, I mean, we understand, I think, a great deal of what you're saying about the challenges. And I think it's in all our interest to share thoughts and discuss. So I don't know if you'd like to go straight into that, or if there's any comments that anybody might have or questions to. Yes, I can see something coming from Annabelle. I don't know if you'd like to come back this way, Henry, because the way that people online will hear us is picked up through primarily this microphone.
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you so much, Henry, and I think others in the room, your talk is extremely relevant and poignant, taking me through more or less my entire academic career, because it's made not just authors. I think MBRAS is the first. Like it is. I started getting the journal then, and always desperately older copies. There's Duncan. I think some of you might know this name. He gave this set to the society, and all the duplicates were going a begging. And so, very, very lucky. So I have got some issues going back to the 1890s, not many, but I was perfectly for it. But I found that I really one of the most useful, valuable article in Malay. Finished its history of Malay in 1940. The journal, after that, in Malay, 45 to 40. post-colonial project.
Mm.
No other. Like me. What I wanted to ask you.
Sorry, before we go on, so we may well want to reprint it.
Well, do it.
And so if we do, we better make sure that we get the Zaba appendix included.
Yes.
Right,
absolutely.
okay, I'll make that.
In Malay,
Yeah.
not.
Yes, yes, yes.
So my question, that's not about the public journal. Was that also in Malay? Because my question is really, when was the first article made?
I'm afraid I can't answer that.
It might be the like.
Yeah,
because he
could
was
be,
Malay.
yes. Yes. The index is online through our website, so you could probably, if you were feeling very energetic, wade through to it. But in talking about the old journals, I didn't mention that actually we moved from our premises, our rather slummy premises in Bangsa last year. And Mubin had retained everything, absolutely everything. And they were all brown, and if you opened them, they fell into pieces. And so we had to have, first of all, an enormous, highly discounted sale. I don't know whether you got wind of that, did you? Anyway, we made quite a lot of money, but we did actually junk an enormous number of surplus publications because Mubin was in the habit of printing 1,500 copies of everything. No hope at all. Yes.
Go ahead and allow you, Gordon.
Hello, thank you very much for your slightly. My own struggle with guilt is something I didn't do anyway. And in a sense, it's embodied in the name of the society you're talking about. And I wonder if it's a particularly strong, possibly even virulent debate in Malaysia about whether they should still have a society which somehow doffs its hat at the old colonial project. In which case, it seems the need to change the name becomes a lot more urgent.
Well, I think you've hit on a very valid point. I mean, I suppose we ought to be thinking of perhaps a Malay language name, which would reflect. Indeed, yes. I think it would probably have to be Malay. But yes, it's certainly a very valid point that you've made there.
A brief comment, and then I have a more elaborate point to make. That is that Richard Winston is, of course, a great hero. This society, because without him, this society would not have survived. Really, he devoted his whole war period, he to coming in, opening the mail, seeing that the journal was out, carrying all the papers, keeping so sort of that leads me on to the more general point, who were engaged in Malaya itself. I mean, part of their real contribution to the culture of the world, the way in which they were able to explain out Malaysia to a niche international organization. And that's my serious point. I think that as we look at the position of learned society, their most valuable contribution at the moment is effectively to be published.
Yes.
To be publishers of material that will not be caught up by, certainly not by commercial, and which may even be too niche for university presses who are dedicated to publishing stuff that's going to make money, truly. And so, obviously, the great strength of the Asian is that it has established a reputation as being the go-to place. You want, wherever you are in the world, and whichever pitch scholarship, whichever field you're in, you want to publish about Malaysia, you should think first. I mean, of the Journal of the Malaysian Branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. And now by you taking on these electronic public, and I think one can see that though it's very challenging, we'll go from strength. But the essence of it is that this is the go-to place for exciting scholarship in a variety of fields about Malaysia and the adjacent.
Well, thank you for that pat on the back for the society. But I think you're probably right. It is a very valuable resource for Malaysia.
I think it's our strength here, but of course we also have a library and collection. So we have more that can be offered to contemporary scholarship than just publication. But I mean, I think without without our journal, without the vigorous program of supporting somehow, that's our main drive at the moment.
Yeah, and I think if it's no intense prize, but pushing with university, more and more people see it that way. So having what you offer as such a special, but also high quality alternative to is a service which is priceless. I don't think we can underestimate that. There's pressure to public, but then the increasing challenge of how to make that really for an awful lot of people, you know, early careers through. We need that official support, that clear boost being able to public.
To
To
MBRAS.
initial use.
Yes.
Provides them with, so I don't think,
Yes.
and thank you, I should have said. Your present,
Oh.
for gifting us the.
Right.
I'll go into it, our librarian,
Coming back to your point about the name of the society, of course, the Indian side, they've changed their name, have they not? I don't think it's called the Bombay branch. I think it's now something else, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, all these so-called
Branches,
associates,
yeah.
They're either older than, or they dropped the name. It's some of the newer, some newer societies are keen to be branded as a branch of the Asiatic Society. So, I mean, Alan Babington.
Yes, in Beijing.
Beijing. Talked about the Royal Society. And we've had, we have a new association, but it's not a formal or constitutional, corporate. Yes, I think it's a question of endangered species or people who perceive themselves as endangered species.
I mean, contrary to that, you know, there's a certain element of brand name, as you pointed out. And if we were to lose the name Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society and we called ourselves just something else, it wouldn't, I mean, we'd lose the cachet, I think.
But on the other hand, we might require a new cachet amongst a new communion of younger scholars. working in
Yeah,
Malay.
oh, yes,
And certainly when I was first in Malaysia, they didn't exist.
yes,
Now, of course, they predominate.
yes,
And certainly which possibly help to invite them into the word, the name which
Yes.
suggests a different world.
yes, yes. Well, there are pros and cons on both sides, aren't there? Mm.
MBRAS does come from Malay.
It does sometimes.
Is there at all a policy about balance of or it's just a question of find yourself saying, oh, we're articles except Malay, it's going to end up not being a. You have these kinds of issues arising or not?
No. We don't very often get articles in Malay. Paul Kratoska is very sympathetic when they come in, prepared to work very hard on them. And on occasions when we produced books in Malay, sales have been absolutely minimal, absolutely minimal. And as honorary treasurer, when somebody suggests a book in Malay, I groan.
Do you have competitors which are fundamentally Malay society?
There's Mubin established, what was it called, the Malaysian Historical Society, which operates out of some very grand premises in Jalan and Razak. And I don't think it produces anything very much, does it? You probably know better than
They
me.
do, but they
Yes.
Those comments.